All right, let's go.
Cutoffs and Coffee, episode 13, 1-3. Thank y'all for joining us again. James and CT again from T3 Performance. Awesome guest here today, Zach Dechant from TCU, 13 years, Senior Assistant Director of Strength and Conditioning over there at Texas Christian. Also author of Movement Over Maxes, stuff that we'll get into here shortly. Also handles the development and implementation of the internship program, which I think is so cool. And during the off seasons works with a ton of MLB players and former Horned Frogs who are still playing baseball at a top level. Zach, thank you so much for joining us on episode 13 of Cutoffs and Coffee.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys having me. I'm excited to talk some shop.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we appreciate that. You know what, I want to ask first to start, what else do we need to know about you that we can't just find online in a bio?
That's today it's an interesting day. The stock market. I'm a big stock market wizard, right?
Okay.
And just before I got in here, that's hopefully my attitude changed. Stock market's not doing so well right now. So, I just got done with our baseball training groups and took a quick peek, and it's a bloodbath out there right now. So I had to put on a smiley face for this.
Yeah, I don't want to look at mine then, man. Do you use Robinhood?
What's that? Do I use Robinhood?
Yeah.
No, I'm a TD Ameritrade guy. I've been on there for 13 or 14 years now. Robinhood wasn't around at the time, but I've heard Robinhood is a big game changer for honestly young investors.
Yeah, man, I love it. That's typically, I try not to check it every day so I don't have those fluctuations in my mood.
Exactly. Yeah. Don't look at it today.
All right, I won't. Awesome, man. So when I was a young coach, I got hired by T3 Performance, and before that I was working at LA Fitness, training people. I loved it. I loved being in the gym, and it helped me as an athlete. But then I got hired by T3 Performance, and the first 30 minutes of training, I had a huge eye-opening experience in terms of how our training director was training me through the warm-up. And that's when it was like, holy crap, I don't know what performance training is, and I need to start learning. And it was a big moment for me to shift how I thought about training and performance. As you got into your career, did you have any moments like that really opened your eyes and shift how you coached and how you approached your training with your athletes?
Yeah, honestly, the best or one of the biggest eye-opening things that I've had happen in my career happened probably 3 years ago. So I've been a strength coach. I started as an intern, I think, in 2002. So going on 18 years now or so. And this just happened a couple years ago. So I can't say I was a young coach then and found something crazy and this has changed everything I've done. We were in the biomechanics lab, and this is a huge problem across strength and conditioning. It's in professional baseball. I just spoke with a coordinator a couple of days ago, and we had the exact same conversation in that everybody wants to address skill development with mobility work. We always think that a lack of skill development is a mobility issue somewhere, and I'm not saying on-base U is a bad system whatsoever. They have an excellent system. A lot of their stuff, though, comes back to mobility work in place of poor skill. When in reality, it's just poor skill is poor skill. We just have to teach better skill, better movement patterns. Now, there is a case in some instances where there is a mobility issue, and that lack, it inhibits our skill development because we can't move in proper positions. We can't get into those positions. But we were in the biomechanics lab, and I had a kid that had poor external rotation. He doesn't have great external rotation on the table. He's always going to be below average on the table. And we were going through our motion capture assessment. His readout would tell us he has poor external rotation in his motion capture. Well, we started cueing him different. We knew what was going on, and we had an idea what was breaking down in his skill. He was over-rotating his upper body. He's a left-handed pitcher. So when he would actually get into his windup, he would face, basically the second baseman in his leg pickup, over-rotated in the upper half. And when his hips would go, there was tension already between his hips and his shoulder. He was already at max, separation. So when his hips went, the chain was already tight. There was no ability to actually separate and create that whip effect. And so his shoulders had to go, and it was pulling his arm out of external rotation early. And I know I might be getting too deep with this, but what we found is when we sequenced him differently and had him stop over-rotating, he was able to get 11 to 15 degrees, I think, more external rotation, and went from below average to absolutely normal, completely normal in one throw. And I'm not talking over the course of, 4 weeks where we stretched his arm and did all this stuff, which would have been the normal process that anybody would have taken. Well, you don't have enough external rotation. Let's go and let's do soft tissue work on the lats and packs. Let's stretch you into external rotation. Let's regain that. Let's recapture that. That wasn't the case at all. It was the sequence was bad. His skill was bad. As soon as we sequenced him correctly, velocity went up in the course of one throw. Velocity went up 4 to 6 mile an hour, which he hit a new PR, and his layback increased 11 to, I think it was 15 degrees, something like that. His average was 12 degrees or something, and went from below average to normal, absolutely normal. Nothing to do with mobility. It was just the fact that he was sequencing poorly. And so that was a huge eye-opener to me, because the previous me would have said, well, let's go attack mobility. We got to look at this and that. And then I realized it's skill. It's just the skill development. These guys suck at their skill. We've got to develop their skill so they get better at their skill, right? We always attack everything. And I talked to this coordinator the other day, and he was like, man, our strength staff just, all they want to hammer these guys with is weight room stuff. The guys that don't do their skill correctly on the mound or have problems with sequencing and all this stuff. And the only thing they'll come up with is, well, we've got to hip hinge better. We've got to teach these guys to get in there. Let's teach this guy a better single leg hip hinge and this and that. These guys are advanced athletes. That's not translating anymore. It's skill. We've got to work on the skill. So that was a big eye opener for me.
Is that, in a sense, like, we tend to think as strength and conditioning coaches that A plus B always equals C, but there's like A plus B plus skill plus intent and plus the mindset of an athlete plus like what you ate this morning and how much you slept, and like there's so many variables that we as strength and conditioning coaches actually are dealing with that it's so hard to really actually create that formula from the weight room to the field that can get that A plus B result, where it's more of a conversation, and having that open line with their pitching coordinator is really where we can start to see that improvement. How much do you coordinate your communication with the pitching coach at TCU, and are those conversations that are a daily basis conversation, weekly, monthly, and are you involved in the season progressions as well with your guys?
Yeah, so I actually handle some of the throwing program here, especially when we get out of fall ball and into more of a developmental phase. I'll handle the throwing programs, or a lot of the throwing programs, for our guys that need to develop or change a mechanic somewhere, some of the arm patterning stuff. So that'll be my responsibility. The pitching coach and I talk constantly. In fact, we just got a force plate mound installed in our facility over the summer. And so we've been doing analysis on all of our pitchers this week, throwing their bullpens off the force plate. So it's got slow motion video. It gives us a readout of everything that's going on with force application into the ground during their pitch sequence. Because really it's all about how you apply force in your sequence to that's your skill. It's force application in the kinematic sequence. That's your skill. So we're breaking that down. I take notes on every guy on every throw that they make. Essentially, we look at the force outputs. I take notes on it. I'll go meet with our pitching coach, Coach Sarlos, and we'll actually go through and say, all right, this guy, this is what he needs. This is where I see limitations. I'll take his feedback, because he played in the big leagues for 9 or 10 years. He knows exactly what he's doing. So he can see some of this stuff that I can't without having the technology, right? This is what a great pitching coach really does, is they can see all these problems that these athletes have without technology a lot of times, right? We've had the motor sleeves on our guys before. We've used those. And some of the stuff that the motor sleeve would tell us, like guys slowing his arm down for his changeup, or he's changing his arm slot in his slider, or whatever the case is, Coach Sarlos would say, before I ever told him that, he would say it in their bullpen. He'd be like, yeah, you're slowing your arm down for your changeup. And then, bing, the numbers would come up, and it would say, you're slowing your arm down in your changeup. And I was like, the guy doesn't even need technology. A great pitching coach doesn't need technology. It's just that the technology reinforces what he's seeing, right? And then we can make it objective and actually change those things. So, we communicate on a daily basis, and I think that's the most important thing that any strength coach, trainer, whatever the case is, anybody, it's communicating with your athlete and your coaches, what they're doing for the day, what you're seeing, what we need to fix, what we need to change, how do we handle those workloads. It's all about communication.
Do you find that with more technology available to more coaches, and whether it be in the gym or whether it be in a skill session with a K motion, K vest, or an arm sleeve, do you find that like guys maybe aren't as ready to receive the coaching from the coach that had 10 years experience in the major league? They want to see that data first, and has been getting buy-in from guys, like, has that been more difficult with the more readily available technology?
No, not necessarily. I mean, you know it as well as anybody. The kids love feedback, right? And anytime we can give objective feedback to our athletes, I think it's a huge plus, because it's just like you said, with the human body, 1 + 1 never ever equals 2, and that's why it is so difficult to be able to train one way and think like this is going to be the outcome every time, right? Because you have no idea what the athletes are doing the 23 hours away from you. You have no idea. And the human body is so complex, it just never works out 1 + 1 = 2. As far as the technology with our coaching staff, that's a progressive thing that's we've gotten better at and has taken some time to build over the last 5 to 10 years, I guess I would say. But it's so readily available out there and everybody's using it that we now understand we can actually gain some benefit from some of this stuff, right? It was very, very, and you guys know this, when a lot of that stuff first came out, there's a lot of coaches that were like, no way, we're not using this, very hesitant to get anything involved in it. To me, the more objective we can make all this stuff, the easier it is for us to make improvements. Because when we're just throwing out thoughts and we think we see what's going on and I think this is working, how do we actually really know? We don't, unless it's objectified. So making it more objective is, I think, one of the big changes I've done or I've made in the last probably 5 years. I didn't necessarily believe in that 5 to 10 years ago. And that's one big, huge change that I've made in the last, I'd say, 4 to 5 years.
From like our standpoint, working with that 12 to 15 to 18-year-old pitcher, what are some of those objective things that we can look at and be able to work into our programs with guys when we're running classes of 25 kids and they're not coming in on the same days all the time? Their schedule is more dictating when they come in than our schedule for them. What are some consistent things that we can look at with these guys in the weight room on the strength side of things to help us stay objective?
Yeah, so I really don't test. I track our maximal strength numbers through basically on a weekly basis. So we don't ever test guys. We don't max guys out. We don't do anything like that. I test them I track them through their training by tracking RPEs essentially. Sometimes we might have a max rep set or something like that up to a 9 RPE, but an easy way to track strength for your high school level athletes is to just have them give you feedback on their RPE each day. So if they went up to 155 pounds, what was your RPE for this? Or how many reps in reserve did you have left? How many reps in the tank did you have left? And then you can track that over the course of 4 and 8 weeks, and you can actually see exactly how they're getting stronger, right? Because we can correlate that back to a max number. And it's an easy way to track strength without ever maxing a kid. The other things that I track with our baseball athletes here, and then as well as we talked about earlier, some of the camps I run with my high school athletes, we track vertical jump, we track speed on a timing system. I think those are 2 super, super easy ones that anybody can track. We bought a cheap timing system, and I can run all of my athletes once a month. We usually do it on a if we're in a camp, like a summer camp format, I'll do it on a deload week. We'll do it once a month. Everybody will run on the timing system. Let's see if you got better over this last 4 weeks. Same thing. I've got a jump Jump on the pad whenever you want. If you feel great, I want you to jump. We want to see if you hit a PR. All right. Get excited about that. So those are 3 things that we track very easily. And then we look at body weight. That's another KPI for us. So body weight, vertical jump, speed, and then your RPEs in the weight room, and we relate that back to a max, and you can easily see if those numbers are going up.
Outside of the weight room, is there anything you guys are able to track? I mean, I would love to be able to take kids and track, food, hydration, and sleep, but that's just not something that works for us. Is that something that y'all have the opportunity to do, or is that something you'd be interested in doing down the road?
Yeah, I mean, we've done it before. We've used health and wellness questionnaires, readiness questionnaires, that type of stuff, where we've tracked sleep and how do you feel, soreness levels. I actually simplified that a ton. So this last season got interrupted by COVID, but what we were doing was I had a scoring sheet, and the athletes would walk in the weight room, and I had a scoring sheet with alive and well, alive, and dead. And so they would tell our interns when they walked in. The interns would ask them, how you feel? I feel alive and well. All right, good. I feel dead. Okay, we're going to adjust the workout. And that's all it was 3 points. Score it that way. This is how you feel. I gave that to our coaches. So our coaches knew the tracking system. So then at practice, we could standardize it at practice too, where a kid walks in, a coach sees a kid and says, hey man, how you feeling today? I'm alive and well, ready to go, coach. All right, great. I'm dead. Okay, let's make an adjustment, or what do we need to do, to stay out of tearing you down more, if you will. So I simplified it. We don't have an app or anything here. We used to do an in-house app, and it got to be, honestly, it was so much information. It just got to be overload. For me as a coach, sometimes for your kids, I think it loses effectiveness. When you hammer these kids every day with 7 questions and you got to do your app every day after practice and weights and this, I think it just becomes overload sometimes. So we simplified it. And honestly, the kids and myself, the feedback we got, they loved it. I loved it. That's probably something that we'll stick with.
I like that.
I love how simple that is. And CT has a Whoop band, and I'm always afraid to get one because I don't want that information. I like to take my own pulse.
Yeah, we've looked at the Whoop band before. I've got a couple of advanced guys that like HRV, so they do some HRV stuff through their phone, which is awesome, and they track that themselves. But at the end of the day, we have to remember, this is what my head coach actually told me when we talked about whether we wanted to do something like Whoop or not. At the end of the day, these are college kids, right? And where Whoop does give you some benefit is that the good athletes, the great ones, are going to notice what's going on and how they're trending and this and that, and it will affect their habits probably. But the majority of our kids are still college kids that are 18 years old that are going to go out and party and drink and go to bed late. And honestly, they need to. That's what you're here for. This is college, right? We know that's going to happen. We just don't let it affect your baseball. We know it's going to happen. I don't want to track that. I don't want to know about it, but just don't let it affect your baseball. So we kind of have to give them, in a way, a little bit of slack there. And I know stories of other teams, other universities that use these things. And we've heard stories of all the older kids basically tie them to a freshman's arm, and he sits in the dorm all night, and they start looking at tracking and GPS and whatnot and say, why is there 17 kids in so-and-so's dorm room on a Friday night? That didn't make sense. Turns out they were getting around the system. So they'll still figure out a way to do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's funny. I'm not sure I would have been ready for the information at the time anyway. I don't think I would have known how to receive it. Now, finally, at 33, I can check a sleep score and I can check an HRV, which is something that's super interesting to me. But yeah, at the time, I don't think it would have done much for me, because I would have done exactly that. Just kept doing what I was doing as long as I was performing on the field.
Yeah. So, and that's exactly what our head coach said. He was like, give that to the pro guys, make them do that. We're not going to do that with the college guys right now.
Well, that's funny. I think that's a good time to transition a bit into the culture you guys have over there. You've mentioned multiple times the reason you've been at TCU for so long is because the culture's so great. And I know you had mentioned, you can't really point to one specific thing besides, really the relationship you have with the coach, and also the relationships you have with the players. Can you talk about that a little more, how important that is a lot of people think our jobs are numbers and getting people strong and getting people fast, but there's so much more to our job than just that. Could you talk a little bit about that and how that helps the culture at TCU?
Yeah. So honestly, it's the culture is our baseball program. It's not what we do in the weight room. It's not what we do, in our biomechanics lab and on the force plates. It's the culture that really develops our athletes. And I'm so fortunate because our head coach reinforces that culture. I mean, he's the one that has built it, but he reinforces it everywhere. And it's not just a one-stop, it's not at the field. It's not just at the field and in the weight room. I'm not going to worry about that or academics or anything. It's everywhere. It's all encompassing, which is, to me, why it makes our program so great. And that all starts, the greatness about that is it all starts in the weight room with the foundation program. When we bring those entry-level athletes, our freshmen, our incoming athletes, freshmen and JUCO transfers in from wherever they're coming from. In the summer, they come in July. And so they start in our foundation program, and that starts the culture right there. We train as a team. I mean, it's very disciplined, right? We don't let guys stand on lines, and it's the small things. So to us, when we're building that culture in the initial stages, the small things matter. Those tiny things, if you let them get away with something that you want them paying attention to, it snowballs down the road, right? Once you lose control of something, you can't ever get it back. So we start that program out with very small, detailed things that matter greatly. And we show them that this is very, very, very important so that when we get down the road, we don't have to rein them back in, so to speak, right? We can actually loosen up the reins and let them roll a little bit. Right now during COVID, I've got multiple groups going at the same time. I've got one group in an upstairs weight room, another group in a downstairs weight room. I can have my leaders from my returners run the entire returning group workout downstairs by themselves. I don't even have to be down there because they know the culture. They've been through it all. They understand the expectations. They can run the entire thing by themselves. And I can stand up here with the foundation program, the developmental guys, and help out up here. I go back and forth, so my kids aren't working out without supervision, obviously, but that's the culture of our program. Another one of those principles is what I'm talking about now. It's 40-1. There's 40 sets of eyes in the weight room that are leaderships or that are leaders, right? There's not just one. I'm not the person that runs the program, right? There's not one set of eyes. There's 40 sets of eyes. So if you let your buddy get away with something that is not acceptable, all you're doing is bringing the culture down. You're bringing the program down. It hurts everybody, right? So I want 40 sets of eyes being leaders and running the program and not one set. So for us, like I said, it starts at the top down. It's that head coach. The small things always matter. And then that principle of 40-1. Everybody is a leader. Everybody, it takes care of the program.
Did you see that type of culture kind of put you at ease a little bit when your athletes got quarantined and you had faith that even though they were on their own because of the culture, because of their experiences, they were going to get better through that, even without having that contact with their team directly?
Yeah, I wasn't too worried about the kids, to be honest. I even had guys, I've got some farm kids. I had one kid that built out of wood his own trap bar. His dad and him built his own trap bar, and they would load it up with cement, concrete. They would load it with concrete bags for him to work out. That was one case. I had kids building exercise equipment all over the place, to be honest, but that was the best one that I saw.
That's awesome.
That's great. Yeah, you talk about attention to detail. I was just having text conversations with one of our starting quarterbacks at one of our schools. And we're just back in the school, with restrictions and whatnot as of a couple of days ago. And we do a lot of, I mentioned, we mentioned off air, we do a lot of lunges, a lot of single leg work and a lot of distance lunges for conditioning. And one of our big things that Coach James and I say is, no steps between lunges, because everyone that as they're resting, they kind of stand up and shuffle their feet. And I told a couple of the freshmen, we had 4 or 5 freshmen in one of the groups. We went for a couple minutes. I stopped them. I mentioned again, stop taking these steps. I stopped him again, told him stop taking these steps. And I sent a message out to the quarterback. I said, hey man, these freshmen don't realize how important it is to stop taking these steps. And he responded with exactly what you said. He said, attention to detail. He said, if you allow them to do it now, they'll try to get away with it, on the field in 6 months or whatever that is that they're playing. And that felt so good to me to know that what we have been talking about, what we've been preaching, what their coach has been preaching, that attention to detail stuff is paying off in the leadership groups. And we've noticed that too, since we've got back. We can now have older groups, we can have the starters and the leaders kind of run those groups. And that's great, because then we can focus on who we need to focus on. And like you mentioned, those athletes would be the fundamental program for the development. Can we talk through that a little bit, what that looks like? I know you mentioned the 5 patterns in the book, and I'd love to talk about that a little more. So what's that foundational program look like for you guys?
Yeah. So when they come to TCU, we basically put all those incoming athletes into one group, and they're going to learn how to move correctly. And to be honest, the majority of it is not in the weight room. It's out on the field. So for instance, today we did a low intensity patterning workout with our developmental group. And that, I think our on the field time was something like probably 45 to 50 some minutes. All right. And then we came up, and the weight room work was less than 30 minutes total. All right. So it's so much, it's about sprinting, jumping, landing, learning how to move your pelvis correctly, athletic positions, being in that proper athletic position. And then we go into the weight room, and it's the big 5 patterns. Our big 5 patterns: squat, a hinge, an upper body push and pull in the horizontal plane. And then our iso stability patterns, which are, the entire core, the entire spine. And then our iso lunge. So it's all encompassing athletic development, right? It's from speed all the way to the iso series, the fastest movement on the field to the slowest movement that we can honestly do. It's just developing those basic movement patterns so that we can advance our athletes down the road into higher level training. Without that, we have nothing. We can't advance guys into anything if they don't know how to move correctly from the get-go.
I think as either a young coach or even maybe like looking at it from an athlete's perspective, coach says, hey, we're going to do A skips. Athlete's like, okay, A skips, got it. Does 10 yards of them, and that's it. And I feel like we missed the boat, especially with those younger guys, on hammering in those positions. Just because the coach knows it doesn't mean that the athlete's doing it. And just because the athlete knows they should be able to do it doesn't mean they actually do. How do you teach these simple fundamental lessons with the importance and the weight behind them to your interns that you have through your internship program, so that they understand the importance of these fundamentals?
Yeah. So this internship group right now has been phenomenal. I challenged him on the first day. I told him, you're going to have to coach your ass off. That's what you're here for. You need to coach your ass off. I don't care, I don't care how you do it, but you've got to coach these kids. And so the interns have been absolutely phenomenal. So one of the ways that I get them involved is it's not just me coaching. I actually have an intern that's running that foundation group right now, or that foundation program, the developmental group. I have an intern that runs the program. He's been with me before. He's a strength coach in professional baseball that's furloughed right now because minor leagues aren't playing. So he'd come back and he's helping me. But we give those interns, we give them coaching duties during the group. So, so-and-so is going to have A series. You've got the entire A series. You're going to coach that. So-and-so's got, the pelvic rotation or the pelvic tilt series. You've got the first block of squat and jumps. So we give those guys responsibility as far as coaching goes to actually have to lead those groups. The beauty of it really, and everybody wants to ask me how we get those, our JUCO guys to buy into a program that's built around the basics. We don't have to do that. And I don't know why, because I suppose it's our head coach from the top down. He demands that those guys are bought in, and that's the team culture. When they get here, they realize you've either got to be bought in or you're not going to be here. So I never, ever, ever have to be honest, I never have to get guys bought in on going through this foundation program. And maybe it's because they see the book out there and maybe that gives it credit. I don't know, but we don't ever have to worry about buying guys in that don't believe in what we're doing.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's something that we talk about at the gym all the time, trying to figure out what it takes, what those things are. And like you mentioned, the book is awesome, and maybe they're taking some notes from that. I think a lot of us have heard a ton of the squat, ton about the hinge, ton about the push and pull and the importance of all those. The isometric lunge is something that we've been messing around recently, of the last couple months. It's not sexy. It's one of those things that you can't make a ton of cool social media posts about, but you feel after doing them for a very short amount of time, the return you get from them. If we're talking ROI, that's one of the best exercises I think you can do. Where did that find its spot in your, in your program? Where'd that find its spot in your book? How long have you been doing them? And what do the guys say they feel the most benefits from the iso lunges?
Yeah. So we've been doing the iso lunge. Since I installed the foundation program, probably 13 to 15 years ago, we've been doing the iso lunge. The one thing I did change recently in the last 2 years is now we go up on the toe just to involve the Achilles a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the only thing that we've really ever changed about it. But it was out of a need to, a lot of my pitchers, depending on injuries, right? Depending on the injuries, our pitchers will reverse lunge their first year and then progress possibly into a deadlift, trap bar deadlift, later on in development. But again, that depends on the injury patterns with pars fractures and whatnot, back injuries. I needed a way to transition from that foundation program because we squat, we hinge. I needed a way to transition something developmental into a reverse lunge pattern. So that's how it really started. Was let's hold the iso lunge. Let's go iso lunge first for positioning. Then we'll move it into the dynamic movement, which is basically a single arm loaded. We go a single arm loaded reverse lunge, and then we progress into our barbell front squat grip reverse lunge. And really what it was just to start working progressions through that. Isometrics, we all know isometrics are awesome for building some tendon integrity, right? Hopefully eliminating some of the tendonitis issues that come with guys that either move poorly or have trained poorly in the past. So we know ISOs are great. I just had a freshman today, one of my fastest athletes, right? And we're timing sprints tomorrow. We do an ISO lunge on our low intensity patterning day. And I said, how's the workout? How's the workout so far? What's your RPE? And he's like, man, these ISO lunges suck. The workout's easy, but these ISO lunges suck, right? And we were only going for like 20 second body weight hold. But ISO lunges are absolutely phenomenal. We love them as part of our program.
For coaches wanting to use them right away, first of all, we always suggest do them. Try them for a long time before you use them. And you'll realize you can't program 2 minutes, 3 minutes at a time. They're just brutal. And I've heard people try to do that. And that's the first thing we say. You obviously have never tried to do it. But day one, if you got a coach listening who hasn't done them before, how would you suggest they program them in?
So for us, we usually start at 10 seconds and then we build up to there. And for me, the most I ever go with those developmental guys is I think we go 30 seconds at most, and then we progress down and we start holding some plates. So I'll actually have them hold plates. They'll go out in front. We'll progress back down to 10 seconds and build our time up to 30 again. I've done them up to 60 seconds. I don't really like to anymore. And this particular group of guys, we've got to accelerate this foundation program because I didn't get 4 weeks in the summer. So we're kind of trying to accelerate that a little bit. So we're not going to get as far into that, into some of the patterning stuff that we normally do. But for the most part, I always stop those guys at 30 seconds. The one thing I would suggest to coaches that want to do it is we start our guys from the bottom up. So we don't have them drop into positions, right? We start them on the ground in a split stance position from there. And then we have them pull their knee an inch or 2 inches off the ground and get into the position from the bottom up. I like that a lot better, especially with your weaker athletes, because what your weaker athletes will do is they'll go down and stop where they think this is going to be tough. They'll stop above where it's going to be tough, right? And they'll always be high. So we actually start from the ground up. I like it going from the bottom up a lot more.
We
And
doing
I
a
found,
beginning, and sorry, James, I keep cutting you off.
yeah, you're good. I found that like they don't get easier necessarily from a
No.
standpoint of like I've been doing them a lot, and they don't get easier, and I think that's what like why I like them so much from a standpoint of like the athletes knows it's going to be an uncomfortable 30 seconds, and that's been a big part of just being uncomfortable in our training environment for us. With the shift to the toe, do you still load those as you progress them from 30 seconds into using weight, and you're still elevating that heel off the ground?
So once we get into our single leg, or our single arm reverse lunge, like the actual dynamic reverse lunge pattern, we don't elevate the toe anymore. I don't elevate the toe. That might be something we look at in the future. But when we're doing the iso lunge, yes, we will still hold a weight as we progress with an elevated heel. The other thing that we played with is actually letting our guys be a little bit higher in some of the iso lunges. I told you I liked it from the ground up. Traditionally, what we've done is ground up 1 to 2 inches. And we actually, this is the fun part, is we put them across from each other. So we've got 2 lines. Guys are facing each other. And so we tell the guy across from the other guy, coach him up on how high his knee is and try to beat him with where your distance is to the ground. So we tell guys 1 inch. And so the guy across from me is yelling at me saying, you're too high, get down. You're not low enough. I'm lower than you. And so it becomes a competition. And so in a way they kind of feed on that instead of thinking about, man, this really, really sucks. So they're coaching each other up the entire time they're doing it. And I actually think that helps a little bit with what we do. But like I said, this in the last 2 years, I've started doing them a little bit higher in more of like an athletic specific position, almost like a single leg, what I would call a single leg athletic stance or split stance athletic position. But I talk about movement over maxes. We do them in that position a little bit more. And so then it's much easier to load.
I like doing them at the beginning with our athletes because it gives me an opportunity to kind of talk them through the training of the day. While you guys are hanging out here for 30, 45 seconds, here's what we're going to do. This is why we're going to do it. But then we've also started using them at the end for, just conditioning pieces. A lot of it being the mental conditioning part, but obviously the physical conditioning and the recovery is there. Are you guys doing both, or are you pretty much just at the beginning? And is it just in the foundational program?
Yeah, so the iso lunge is mostly, for us, it's all in the foundation program and it's at the end. We do some other isometric variations with our advanced guys that happen at the beginning, just to, if you want the truth, turn on motor units. So we'll do some 6-second iso holds. Verkhoshansky talked about this all the time to stimulate the neuromuscular system, and then you actually get a stronger response with your dynamic effort work, sometimes with speed strength, with strength speed. So some of our faster movements, we'll use we'll use an isometric to stimulate the body first, and then move into our powerful stuff. I use that a lot with our pro guys and my advanced group here at TCU.
Now,
in season, off season, all the above.
It's mostly off season. Yeah, I don't think I haven't used those methods during the in season yet.
Okay. Cool.
Now, to kind of transition a little bit, I saw a post and CT shared it with me that you put out. And CT, you might have to help me with the exact wording on this, but it was discussing long-term periodization in terms of its efficacy or effectiveness with team sports. And being, I was able to play college football and baseball, and CT was a college football player, and we understand that feeling of it's kind of a transient training, and you're always making adjustments on the fly, like you talked about. In terms of those adjustments, how are you making those adjustments, and just kind of explaining the thought behind that approach is not necessarily what you see everywhere, right? Most strength coaches are going to be like, we got to have that 12-week plan, and it's got to be this. And at the end of 12 weeks, everybody's maxes are going to go up, and it's going to be great. And we're going to celebrate. But that's not necessarily how team sports work.
Yeah. And the best training period I have with any athlete, top to bottom, doesn't matter if I got a 9-year-old or, high school kids, any athlete is my pro baseball guys, because they have such a long off season. Nobody else until you get to professional baseball has that long of an off season. And you have to be agile with your training. You have to be able to change and adapt to everything that's going on, because we've already talked about it. The human body It's not a 1 + 1 = 2. So if they do too much at the field, or if a guy is sore, I can't bring him in on a Friday or whatever day we're doing speed development on a high day. I can't bring him in and say, okay, now we're going to test your sprints. That's stupid. That's an injury risk waiting to happen if he's done too much, right? So everything that we do has to be agile and fluid. Everything has to be fluid. You cannot, what people don't understand is at the college level, I don't have this beautifully structured program of, of long-term athletic development. And this is this block and this block and this block. There's structure to our long-term athletic development, but it is chaos in the middle of that. Because here's an example. Right now, we've got 4 weeks on the front end of, we just returned from 16 weeks of who knows what our kids did, right?
Yeah.
Trying to keep track of them. But in reality, did you get your speed work in? Were you able to lift? Were you able to front squat? No, I had to use a wooden hex bar with cement bags. So I probably couldn't go up to my 90% or whatever, right? So we're coming back. So I've got to reintroduce training in that 4 weeks. All the meanwhile, they're over there at the field doing individuals, right? We're starting bullpens because we're getting ready to play. Then we'll have an 8-week period of a 7 to 8 week period, and it could even be longer, of fall ball where it's competition. So now I can't run a full off season block of speed development, power development, all this stuff because we're playing. And then we get into fall break, Thanksgiving, and we're actually gone. So we're done with school before Thanksgiving. Wow. And that's it. That's my fall. I've got 4 weeks on the front end, and then I've got 8 weeks on the back end, which is fall ball in competition. That's it. And then my guys go home for 8 weeks, and then they come back in January and we start playing games. So I can't, it's so impossible to have, we're going to do the strength block, and then we're going to do this block or that block and periodize everything out. It comes down to asking a guy in the warm-up every day, how do you feel? How's your body responding? How was practice yesterday? How does your arm feel? Do you feel good? Hamstrings are okay? That's what it is. And then if it's not, I adjust the workout. I adjust what they're going to do. So tomorrow, I'll give you a quick example. Tomorrow is a high day for us. We've got, for our developmental guys, our foundation program, those guys are going to test 10-yard accelerations for the second time this semester. They'll test them. We tested them last week the first time. This is week 3. They'll test them for the second time. And I will go through every one of those guys and say, how was your individual yesterday? How you feel? How's the body doing? Responding well? If they're not going to do that. They're not going to do the fly work we do before, and they're not going to test acceleration. So it's just a give and take all the time. It has to be agile. It has to be fluid.
And you also have, how many guys you carry on a roster, that many individuals with different body types, different body compositions, different needs, different intents in their training, different goals in their life, different course loads, different sleep schedules, different class schedules.
Right.
I think that's a lot right there too, from an individual standpoint.
Yeah. Right now we've got, we're carrying 48 guys.
Wow.
So you're absolutely right. I've got an hour on some days. I've got an hour and 15 or 20 minutes on other days to train all 48 guys. And then on top of that, you've got other situations, like if there's a guy that goes down with COVID or close contacts, those guys can't be in the weight room. So now I've got to figure out other ways to get those guys, to maintain what we're doing outside of the facility. So yeah, there's a host of crazy stuff that's going on right now that you have to be able to adjust and adapt to.
And we kind of like all the craziness.
Yeah.
From a standpoint of like these kids that are with us are going to be tougher for dealing with all of this adversity and being able to handle baseball specifically, so many ups and downs and so much failure in the sport. And I think they're learning a lot of lessons through this time and through this chaos that hopefully will help them with their mindset going into their next competitive season.
Yeah. I mean, for you guys too, it's the same way, right? You have to, the kid might've lifted at high school or done conditioning somewhere in his program already, or thrown for the day. And so you have to do the same thing with your athletes when they walk in. You have to say, how's everybody feeling? What did you do today? Did you, have you overdone it? Have you already lifted? We need to adjust your program then. Because that's happened to me in the past too with some of our camps. A kid walks in and says, hey, We did a 5-rep max on clean today. We back squatted up to a 1-rep max, and we did 10 sets of 10 on bench press. And you're like, well, that's going to change a lot of things.
You got a pump for sure with the bench press.
Right.
Which
We did 6 chest exercises, and we did 3 sets of 2 on back squat.
Man.
Zach, if you've got 2 athletes that come in same time, you've got one athlete say, I'm alive and well. You got one guy say I'm dead. Yeah. Are there a couple boxes you're just trying to check for each guy to make sure they get something done before they get out? And what do those look like?
Yeah, so for us, it's actually very easy. I build the workout with a ton of options in season. So this applies much more in season than the off season. But we build it with a bunch of options. So the guys have intensity options and volume options. Intensity options, if you are alive and well, feel great for the day, you can do full intensity. If you want to work up to a couple of singles or doubles as we go, have at it. That's fine. But you're going to do the workout as listed for the most part, right? If you're a guy that is dead for the day, I've got usually I've got boxes highlighted as this is minimum requirement. You can also adjust those, what we would say standard percentages to the light percentages. So over here on the other side of the sheet, I've got light percentages. If you're dead, you're going to do the light percentages and the minimum volume requirements for the day, 1 to 2 sets on all your accessory exercises, and get out. If they're extremely, I don't want to say dead, but if they're really in a hole, maybe we would let them go home. But you got to remember, we've got 470 some athletes or 450 some athletes, whatever it is here at TCU. There's 19 other sports. I've got 1 weight room. Baseball doesn't have their own weight room. We train with everybody. So a lot of times during the season, we try to keep it as consistent as possible. That's what baseball athletes really need, is consistency, right? So we're not necessarily going to let a kid, I'm not feeling, I'm dead. Most likely we're going to get a little bit of work in, right? We just want to stimulate the body, because a lot of times that's recuperative for them, right? It's actually good for them to get a little bit of a workout in. Let's not trash them and get them out of here quick. So that's what it becomes. If we have a kid that's injured or something like that, or is really, really down, says, hey man, I haven't slept in 2 days, I've had finals, we'll make some adjustment. And I might say, hey, come in tomorrow, go home and sleep, or whatever the case is. But most of the time with those dead guys, it's some small adjustments to get you out of here fast, light workout. Let's get some blood flowing and get you on the move.
Awesome.
There are a couple things that I want to touch on that we talked about kind of off camera before we get you out of here. Of course, we want to be, aware of your time. Busy guy. We're getting up to that about our time. So let's just knock some questions out real quick, and then we'll get you off if
Sure.
you're cool with that.
Yeah, no problem. I got time.
Okay, excellent. Well,
Awesome.
So I'm interested in, we talked about the book, the writing process, actually sitting down, putting pen to paper, and writing the book of movement over maxes. A lot of us as strength coaches, take in our information from books. Now it's a lot of audiobooks and podcasts and things like that. What made you want to sit down and write a book? Have you always been a writer? Was that an easy process? Kind of walk us through that if you can quickly.
Not an easy process at all. I wrote the book because I used to get, and I still do, emails from high school coaches. Hey, send me a program. What do I do? Send me your program for baseball. And
Yeah.
I'm like, dude, no way. It's like speaking Chinese. You would have no idea what's going on with this, right? It's context specific. So it was out of that. And I knew high school coaches needed something in place to help them, because a lot of baseball coaches aren't strength coaches. So they needed this in their life in a way, right? Because they emailed me all the time about it. So the writing process was hard. It probably took me from start to finish about 14 or 16 months. But that was me trying to kind of weasel around the process of how I write this and whatnot. When I just sat down one day and said, screw this, I'm going to write exactly what we do. Because at first I had always had the opinion, like, don't tell everybody everything, kind of give them the overview, and then they can figure out the specifics and whatnot. It was impossible. I said, screw that. I'm just going to write exactly what we do from day one. Started typing that, and it took me probably 4 to 6 weeks to finish the entire thing. So that was very difficult until I did that and said, I don't care. I'll give everybody everything. Nobody's going to run it like I do. And that's when it came out.
I love that. That's awesome.
Yeah, exactly
You
right.
got the cheat codes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I gave everybody everything. At
Yeah.
first I was like, I can't do that. You know, this is our program. This is what makes us special. And then I heard a LSU baseball coach back in the day, and I can't remember his name, a famous LSU baseball coach. You guys might know. Anyway, somebody asked him, they said, well, why are you giving away your mental program? He was very big into the mental game back in the 70s, 80s. They were winning national titles. And he started making videos on it. And they were like, why are you giving these things away? And he said, nobody will ever run it like I do. Everybody's going to have their own spin. I'll give them all the information. They're going to run it their own way. Nobody will ever be able to duplicate what I do. And so it was when I heard that comment that I was like, it makes all the sense in the world. Give them everything. They'll run it how they run it. Nobody will ever duplicate what we do here. And it's that was the key.
That's awesome. Such a great way to look at it. College kids, full course loads, trying to figure out their, boyfriend, girlfriend situation. They've got class, they've got pitching coaches, they got every, test they're studying for, everything they're trying to do. And we're trying to navigate that. We're starting to see now, and I say starting to see, it's been something going on for a long time. The youth kids, we've got parents who want to throw their kids into everything, and they're an hour on film, and then they're an hour with the pitching coach, and they're an hour hitting, and then they're an hour doing their strength stuff, and then they're doing the same thing at their school before all that. What's something that we can say to the parents to have them understand that all this overloading their kids is not great, and it's leading to all these injuries that we're seeing, these degenerative issues at 9 and 10 years old from our youth athletes? What are some things that we can say to our parents that will help them kind of understand the problem with that process?
Yeah, I mean, one of the first things, if they're spending more time in a week working on sport skill than their age, that's a huge red flag right there, right? Huge red flag. A 10-year-old that spends 10 to 15 hours a week doing baseball, sports skill, other stuff, lessons, huge red flag. What needs to be conveyed to these parents is how important moving, speed development, all those things that we talk about in Movement Over Max is how important those things are as these kids grow up. When your kids don't move, they basically turn into cement, and that doesn't change easily as they get older. I actually was working with a couple sixth graders last night. I've got a group of youth athletes like we talked about, and I was watching this one kid move, and he really hasn't done anything. He hasn't done any training. It's all been baseball specific, but he's not an active kid, and he moves so poorly, and it's so difficult to get him out of these patterns. When I have another kid who is super active, sixth grader, right beside him, that can drop his butt down to the ground on an overhead squat, the best overhead squat I've ever seen. The kid's never trained. He's just active in everything, right? He's active. They've got him in multiple sports, nothing specialized, right? He's just very active. And the difference is alarming. And that set off a bell in my head last night watching this of how important it is to get your kid moving at a young age, right? With long-term athletic development, and maybe this is getting too long for you guys, but with long-term athletic development, right, they talk about, Esteban Bailly talks about windows of development, of speed development with youth athletes from 7 to 9 for boys. There's a window of where your body actually kind of accepts speed development better, right? From 11 to 13 is a second window of speed development for boys. Strength development, the window is open from 13, 14 after peak height velocity on. So there's these little windows that are very important to get your kid, honestly, running fast, moving well, teach them coordination and all these things. We need to have those happen at an early age. The earlier, the better. We want that motor pool to be as big as possible, as early as possible. And that's where specialization kills these kids, is because they, especially with baseball, they become one-sided asymmetrical athletes. And all that does is ruins development further on down the road, when you don't necessarily see that as much with like a football, basketball kid, because those are various, they're various movements. It's not one-sided, it's not asymmetrical. And so they don't get locked into these patterns as much. And it's just so bad for these baseball kids that if they're not out sprinting, if they're not out moving as young athletes, I think you're hurting future development.
I think one way I've related that to some of our athletes is that we don't want to try, if we're throwing 80 miles an hour, we're not going to do everything we can today to throw 81 tomorrow. Because if we constantly think that we have to perform on a daily basis, and this is the same for the weightlifters that we work with for our Olympic, weightlifting, is we don't want to perform for 1 more kilo tomorrow. I want you to be in the sport for 4 more years and see what happens then.
Yeah.
And it's a tough thing for a young kid to be able to comprehend, because they are thinking more so in the moment, more so in, what am I doing now? What am I doing today? And it is a little harder for those kids to step out, take a zoom out look at where they really want to be in 4 years.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's so imperative to get young athletes honestly moving and sprinting, jumping, teaching them coordination before the age of 10, especially.
Yeah, you think about, we all learned from hanging from monkey bars and swinging and falling and playing in the dirt and rolling around and playing night games and tag and all that. And that's just stuff that we unfortunately don't see anymore. So we've got to make sure that, we continue the conversation with the parents, continue the conversation with the kids, and hope that they just can take something from it.
Yeah. So let me touch on one more thing real quick.
Yeah, absolutely.
They actually say that that the speed at which the legs move doesn't change after the age of 13 or 14, that's all built in the nervous system before the age of basically 13 or 14. So your frequency doesn't change after that. The only thing that changes is your force outputs. So that's another huge, eye-opening statement for parents, is that we need to ingrain these before they get to those teenage years, so that when they do, they've already built those frequencies high. Now we can add the force on top, and that's what builds speed.
Wow. As long as they're built through the proper movement patterns.
Right.
Right. Back to what we were talking about. Okay. 3 favorite exercises for baseball.
Oh boy. Probably front squat for me. Front squat, reverse pull-up is going to be in there, and I'd have to go with the RDL as a staple.
Reverse pull-up.
Yeah.
Is
Reverse.
that like an inverted?
Yeah, the inverted row. We call
inverted row.
Okay.
Inverted row.
When you have your guys hold your deadlifts or your RDLs, do you go double overhand, alternating? How do you set that up?
Double overhand, unless we get to a weight that the grip is the limiting factor, which is usually not that often. I mean, then we'll go reverse grip and we'll just switch sides every time if we have to.
Okay.
We try to get away from straps as much as possible. I don't yet let any guys. I've got one guy that can use straps only because he can RDL. I've got a pitcher that's 210 pounds that can RDL like 500 for doubles. Wow. He's stupid strong, which leads us to another question.
Sure. Strong enough. And you were going to say something too about the inverted row, about the reverse pull.
If I could only do 3 exercises right now for my baseball guys, it would probably be the front squat, inverted row, and RDL. Yeah.
Awesome. And last one here, we'd like to wrap it up with, and I say it because I want people to be able to take something away from this conversation right away. I think there are probably 50 things we've already said that coaches will be able to take, coaches, athletes, parents could take away from this conversation right now. But alongside saying that, what do you think we as strength coaches, or just people in the industry of strength development, what do you think we're missing?
Honestly, what I just said is one of my biggest things in the last couple of years that I've discovered. Strength is probably not as important as we think, right? What is strong enough? I think the barrier for entry is actually much lower than people would probably guess. Realistically, what I'm trying to get people to understand is the stuff that happens out on the field is probably just as important. I shouldn't say probably. It is. In my eyes, it's just as important. It's more important than the stuff that happens in the weight room. The speed development, the jump development, developing elasticity, reactivity, all of that stuff is much more important than really what happens in the weight room. And so often what it is, the nervous system is powerful, right? if you've got a guy that is extremely, extremely fast, explosive fast guy, he's strong in the weight room, whether he's displayed it or not, right? We could take any one of our football kids that comes in that run a 4.2, 4.3 40, super fast guy. They may have never been in a weight room before, but I guarantee you their nervous system is efficient enough that in 6 week time, they could easily be back squatting, 465 pounds, 500 pounds, because they're that efficient. Their nervous system is what builds that strength. And so for so long, I really believe that we've confused strength developing speed, when I really think that the nervous system, a powerful nervous system, gives us speed and it can display strength, right? And speed and, power are the two big factors that we want with our athletes. The weight room is great, but I think we get way too carried away with what happens in the weight room. Like I said, our developmental guys today in a low intensity patterning day spent 45 or 50 minutes out on the field, jumping, sprinting, the athletic positions, and then came up in the weight room and lifted for, 30 minutes at most. So I think we get carried away with strength development sometimes too much.
And that's super important for people to understand that this is a strength coach saying we get carried away with strength. So that's just something for them to think about. James, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it doesn't matter how strong you are. Like 95 is 95. Do you have the prerequisite skills, eye-hand coordination to be able to hit it? I don't care if you can deadlift 500 pounds, but 95 is 95.
Right.
Sure,
there's still, you could still say, yeah, more strength. It's going to lead to some robustness and hopefully a reduction in injuries. But at the end of the day, I've got a MLB guy that had honestly never lifted weights before. He didn't know what an RDL was, if you can believe that. He didn't know what an RDL was, a hip hinge. I said, have you ever done an RDL or a hip hinge? And he's like, what's that? Right? He'd been in the big leagues for 2 years, and he throws 99 miles an hour. And he's never done any of this stuff, right? So, nervous system is efficient, and he has an unbelievable kinematic sequence. So it's not always all about strength, right?
That's awesome.
Zach, your social media stuff is awesome. Where can we find you? Where can people follow you?
Yeah, everything is just my name, Zach Dechant, Instagram and Twitter. That's where most of that stuff happens. And then I've got a blog that I probably don't post on as much as I should. Most of that happens on Instagram these days. That's at zachdechant.com, and then movementovermaxes.com is where they can find the book that we've been talking about.
Awesome. Well, anything else to add before we get out, man? Thank you so much for joining us. This was awesome and super beneficial for everybody. No,
listening. I enjoyed it. Good luck with your athletes here during this time. It's obviously not easy, but like we talked about earlier, it's going to make them better for it, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. Yeah. This was awesome.